Welcome to Intellicide. This is the post-irony edition. I'm Anthony Gentry, and my co-host is Kyle Palmerville. So today's topic will be about vaccines, mandating them, and how ironic it is.
Everything about the whole situation's got some irony to it, in a way. I mean, we were talking about it, and we discussed, how employers are mandating vaccines in a lot of places now, and how they've spent decades undermining the unions that could have stood up and fought back against that.
Right. Yes, sir.
And at the same time, I mean, it's the obvious irony is the fact that the pandemic, largely, like the deaths related to the pandemic, are largely the unvaccinated. It's become a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And it's ironic that they are, so many of them, it's become a meme that the collection of someone's posts from, it's become a thing that I've seen now on the internet where people who are anti-vax who end up getting COVID and passing away, like people will put together their posts in like this string of a narrative, showing like this same narrative over and over. I don't believe in it. The vaccine's not real. The virus isn't real. I'm not going to catch it. Oh, I caught it. Oh, it's really bad. Oh, I'm getting sick. Oh, the person passed away.
Right.
And yeah, that's the obvious irony, that they've turned into a meme about it.
It's tragic. When you think about the people, as you said, that there's a lot of fear with the vaccines, and we have to attribute that to the misinformation that has been put out there constantly by individuals. And trust me, I understand that there's a lot of people that they were anti-vaxxers before COVID even came about.
Yeah.
But the pandemic has been treated as a political weapon.
Well, and there is truth to the criticism, which is, an additional layer of irony, is that there is, of course, a layer of truth to the criticism that the anti-vaxxers make, that the media does overblow things. Like we have a profit-driven media that survives on sensationalism, and so they do. They every variant is a doomsday variant, according to the media, the way that they write their headlines and what stories they decide to run, you can see a sensationalism streak, so there is, I mean, that is true that they do. So after a year and a half of fear, I mean, it is kind of a drumbeat of fear in a way, from the media about the pandemic. So people are frightened, like you said, and so it is a counterintuitive side effect of all that fear being drummed over a year, that people are afraid of the vaccine now.
Right. Yeah. And so they have chosen whatever reasons not to get vaccinated, but that's fine, and that's your right to do so. But it would be different if individuals took precautions with not getting that vaccine.
Right. I mean, if it could be trusted, and that's kind of, if you could trust your fellow Americans, the ones who aren't getting vaccinated, to wear a mask like the CDC recommends, if you're not going to get vaccinated, wear a mask. But we all know, like you mentioned, that those are the same people who won't wear a mask, won't social distance. So
it's a confluence of factors that have resulted in where we are today. And we look like we are about to go to year 2 of this position, in this posture. And it's unfortunate.
Well, I mean, we talked a long time ago about how, when the beginning of the pandemic, when people were first saying, oh, it's going to be a couple of weeks, worst case couple months, and we were like, no, think longer, it's going to be much longer. And you think out a few years, it's quite likely, it's looking more and more likely now, that COVID is just going to be here to stay in different variants, and that you're probably going to need, it's going to be like the flu, is that quite honestly, you're to avoid getting really sick from it, you're going to need to get vaccinated.
Yes, sir.
I do think that it's funny because I really personally, and I'm not a scientist and I'm not a, like, of course, qualifying whatever I'm about to say, like this is always dubious, but not being a scientist, I do find that the mRNA vaccines are something of a miracle advancement in science. They've been working on them for a long time. I mean, mRNA vaccines have been in study for decades. But this is like the first practical application. So people are like, oh, it's untested and everything. It's like, these types of vaccines have actually been around for a long time. This is the first practical application we've seen of it. And it's really impressive how quickly they were able to produce one based on a new virus and how effective it is. So it's trying to see, the bright side of things. I do think that that's kind of a miracle, these vaccines.
Absolutely.
And
I
yeah,
mean, but it also speaks to what can be done if people collectively or put their minds together for a common goal. But as we mentioned at the intro, one of the things that I find very ironic about this situation is how, right, companies now are, mandating,
right.
hey, you get vaccinated to come back to work or to come back into the workplace. And, some individuals, and again, they have the right to do so. They are saying, I don't want the vaccine.
Right.
And they,
It's
like
the
the
very
Houston
people who
nurses.
you just know that a lot of these people are the same people who, like, because a lot of these hospitals where this is happening are like
Right,
not unionized.
right. Yeah,
So it's like the same people who say, like, well, if you don't like it, just work somewhere else, are now saying,
exactly.
well, I shouldn't
Exactly.
have to go work somewhere else.
Exactly. And again, these Houston nurses, Houston Methodist Hospital, they were fired, and the courts in Texas backed them up that the hospital had the right to fire these nurses. And we all know that many states, and I believe Texas is the same, they are right to work states. They don't need a reason to fire you. It's their prerogative, and I don't like that situation.
Right.
I honestly, believe that, right, there should be some justification outside of, especially something like this. We're talking about individuals' health decisions, etc. But
Mhm.
again, we are looking at decisions and the erosion of unions and these groups that would protect workers' rights,
Right.
the erosion of their power and their memberships over the last 30, 40 years. And now, when corporations have been designated as individuals, and right, their rights have been protected. Now, people are seeing the consequences of those decisions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do. I think it's unfortunate, but I do hope that people understand that there is a place for unions and the protections that they offer. Now, that doesn't mean to say that unions don't have their cons, but I think it all
Right.
comes down to individuals and their way of thinking and their attitudes or whatever more than anything else. It's not the institution that's faulty. It's the people that make up those institutions that may be faulty.
Right. Institutions are just systems, and we create the systems to deal with real life problems.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the challenges that we face, the people who are dismantling these things are basing a lot of their arguments on, these people have come up under the benefits and protections that were gained by unions and the educations that they received and the safety that they got in their jobs. And they spent their time undermining the unions and denying people of that protection. And now we're seeing this theme across a lot of um, the media, well, certain conservative media, that's saying,
Mm-hmm.
well, these these tech giants are too big and too powerful, and how do they have all this power that they can censor the
Right.
president, et cetera, et cetera. Or all these businesses have too much power in mandating vaccines for their employees. It's like, if only there were some organization that could
Yeah.
fight back against that corporate power in some way, maybe by organizing the labor. And it's like, this has all been done before, people. It's like all of these arguments, all of these abuses, if you'd have paid attention in history class, you'd see that, yeah, you
Right.
know
Yes,
what,
sir.
you give people too much power, any people too much power, and they abuse it, right?
Right. Yes,
So
sir.
the whole point is to spread. People are like, oh, these institutions are useless. No, it's to spread out power, because it's done. If you concentrate power too much, it starts getting abused.
Yeah.
Granted, it can be abused in smaller segments when it's spread out, but
Right.
having all the power in one hand, it just makes everything, the abuses are magnified in a way.
Well, right. Again, we people are falling, and this is the biblical aspect of that. So, right, it's to me, it's inherent that anything that we come up with, because of our fallen nature, is going to be flawed because of that. When you have people in charge, and their decisions or whatever, I'll even go make this point. They've created several different AIs for some of these chat, and social media platforms, and they've had to take them down because the way that those AIs are built to learn, and what they become some of the most toxic, racist, and
Because it learns from
inflammatory.
what it sees.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
so, when you
Well,
have people.
so that is actually, so the AI thing, right? Being a reflection of man, it
Yes.
is that's the basis really of the whole fear of AI, right? Like Terminator is really like an updated version of Frankenstein, which was really the idea of a reflection of man, that if holding a mirror up to mankind, and suddenly mankind realized, oh my God, I really am ugly, I'm a monster. Which is kind of like the thing, is like the monster realizes it, and the AI realizes it, Ultron realizes it, that
Mhm.
they look at mankind and they go, oh, well, these guys are pretty awful, we should probably destroy that. So you have to, one of the biblical lessons, honestly, is that um compassion, really
Oh
having
yeah.
empathy for other people, being able to put yourself in another person's shoes. You are your brother's keeper.
Well,
The idea that you have a responsibility to care for other people around you,
yes,
um,
sir.
is really, I don't know, it's, I don't, so like I grew up Catholic, right? So I guess my formative philosophies are all based on the Christian faith. And
Mhm.
I I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think that we are inherently, mankind, like you mentioned, is flawed. Nobody's perfect,
Mhm.
and everybody is capable of good and evil.
Oh yes, sir. Yes,
That
sir.
it is really your choices in life that make determine whether you lived a good life or not. And a lot of that
Right.
actually has to do with, part of the problem with the selfish philosophy is, once you're gone, the only thing that anyone remembers about you is what you did for other people.
Mhm. Right.
So generally speaking, like people who live their whole life doing only for themselves, and then they're gone, they're never remembered. Like their
Right.
existence came, left, and they made no mark in the world,
Right.
largely.
Well,
So
and the parable about the man that stored all his goods, thinking that, hey, I'm gonna be set. I got all this in the storehouse. Hey, you don't know when you're gonna pass away, so someone else is gonna inherit that. You might not even be able to enjoy it.
right.
And I like how some people like to use the acronym for the Bible. They say it's basic instructions before leaving Earth. And if that's how you want to look at it, then okay, great. But just follow the directions and the instructions that are given in there. And right, this world would be a better place. I mean, it wouldn't be paradise per se, but I think we would all be able to live on it and
Yeah.
enjoy ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah. It is. I think so the Eastern philosophy really is what I think teaches me that, or informs my belief that personally that darkness is necessary in order to have light. Like, you can't have light if there's not darkness.
Right.
You really can't have good if there isn't evil. Like, you can't have good if there isn't bad. But the problem is, a lot of it is subjective. Like, what some people see as good is bad for other people, which is amazing how prevalent that is today. So many people's identities about or foundational beliefs about what is good, isn't, especially when it comes to, I mean, here I am, I'm wearing American flag, but there are people I know whose their belief in America is really kind of the toxic mythology of America, that what was it, the manifest destiny.
Well, right,
Yeah,
but
that a
right.
lot of
That's
the march across the continent, the conquering of the nation, was, they believed, they in their mind, that was a good thing, and all of this, where
right, but that's more akin to nationalism.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
So,
which is, linking of your beliefs in good or bad to your nation state identity.
Yeah. I mean, I just wish that one, unions would be more powerful and more influential to protect workers' rights. I've always said
I do
that
too.
Unions. One of the problems that I have with the union is that they protect blanket. So you can have a bad worker, and you can know it's a bad worker, and they're going to give him the same protections as someone who is inherently a good worker. The problem is that they don't a lot of times have a mechanism to eject those bad workers, and that they know are bad workers.
Yeah.
And they enjoy the benefits of those who are good workers. And that's not a good practice or whatever per se. And it undermines the goodwill and the influence of the union.
Yeah, it does. Long time ago, you and I did, in a previous podcast, we did an episode that was all about hackers and people who had actually done things to harm their companies. Because there's a practice, especially in IT, about when someone puts in their 2-week notice, they're generally done right then. They're walked out right then.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea is that, oh, well, the person could be a security threat. They could plant a malicious, bug or whatever. But a lot of that happens, like we showed as going through all the stories, that a lot of that happens long before that. That those things, the ability to have a way to address your issues with your employer, when the employer feels like when we went through a lot of those stories, right? These people who did things like this, who lash out against employers, and this might actually apply to workplace shootings and things. People lash out at employers. They feel like, they had no other choice, or they were, because it's a, corporate power is essentially a monarchy, and it's a modern monarchy in a way, right? Like, they're basically kings of their own kingdoms. And people lash out against that because they have no other means. So, but if unions were a way to give people a peaceful means to try to address issues with their employers, so they don't have to resort to things that desperate.
Right.
The guy
it's
who,
one of those things.
So the guy who was in, like we were talking about the vaccines and the fear that it built up, right, has built up a tension in the country, and especially among people who are, different people have different fear triggers, right? But I think what we're seeing is, collectively, there is a group in America and in society, in humans in general, who have as a fear trigger something about government and vaccines, and they see conspiracies everywhere. So,
Right.
it's not entirely rational you know, the
Yes, sir.
reactions of all these people. There is an irony to it, right? Because it's an irony that lemmings run off a cliff. Not that I'm comparing anti-vaxxers to lemmings entirely, but you know, it's not entirely rational. It's, you know, you're dealing with like a fear-based emotional response to a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
And it's like, you see the guy in Washington this past week, the guy who said he had a car bomb, drove his car up onto the walk in front of the the Library of Congress,
Mhm.
told the police he had a bomb and that he had to blow up a 2-block radius,
Mhm.
and had a standoff for hours. Claimed there was 4 other people around the city who also had bombs. And he started live streaming on Facebook, and he gave this really fear-driven, desperate sounding plea. Like, this guy is just in the throes of he's terrified of something. He doesn't know what,
Mhm.
and he's desperate to do something. He didn't do, I mean, nothing about it was rational. It's just this really heightened emotional state. And it is one of those, like you mentioned, I really wish there was unions too, right? Like, it feels like at the moment, I don't know, personally, maybe this is just a nihilistic me, but it feels like we're sitting on the plane next to each other, looking outside as we're going down, going, oh, I wish we had a wing. Like,
You
yeah,
know,
me too.
I've
Like, at this point,
I've had
but
conversations with individuals that, and you know, they have some valid points. They don't like, they like private unions, but they don't like public unions.
yeah, I can.
You know, and you know, I can understand where they're coming from. But you know, again, unions came about, you know, as a necessity from, you know, overreach from those institutions that those unions are dealing with.
Yeah.
And to me, it's almost un-American when the very concept of America and a collection of 50 states coming together. I mean, it wasn't 50 when we originally, you know, founded the United States, but you know, the idea that separate states come together to form a whole, to me, that's the very foundation of a union, and where that idea sparked from. So it's very disconcerting for me, for people that just rail against unions just on the simple concept itself.
Well, and this is where, like, a lot of the people who I've talked to who are really far right, anti-union, anti-government in a way. And I've had people, you know, recently who tried to make the argument to me that there's no such thing as society. You know, it's like they've taken this belief so far that, like, they're just anti-society. Like, they don't believe, like, everybody's just an individual, everybody for themselves, there's no such thing as society. It's like, the whole point of a government, any government, is the fact that you need to come together to solve some problems, right? But they fundamentally reject that. I mean, it's like someone who just rejects the idea that it's dark at night or something. Like, how do you even talk to them? How do you even argue that?
The very instant, listen, I wasn't around back then, but the lack of any kind of structure as a government, whether it be local, you know, state, national, whatever. Without that, we'd have chaos in the streets. I mean,
and you can see it in places where they don't have government,
right?
you know.
I don't understand, like, why people don't, like, history supports that.
Yeah.
You know, the very foundation of society is order, and it's all. And it's funny that the far right is, you know, what you mentioned. They now believe that, because now that sounds in accord with the very far left, that, you know, the anarchists.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. It's like it goes full circle.
Right.
Yeah.
They've gone so far.
And it really is, like, if you look at the people who are acting out on both the far right and the far left, like, you look at the Proud Boys on the far right, and then you look at, like, Black Bloc on the far left. Fundamentally, if I watch them in action, there's very little difference between them. It's like
Right.
they show up, they cause trouble. It's like they don't believe in government, or, like you said, like
Yeah.
fundamentally you get around, like they're not that different from each other. They're just
Right.
at the extremes. Like that's
Right.
the thing, is that a lot of the to not be extreme, you have to be able to agree on a lot of certain things. And that's kind of where the political middle is, right? Is like, yeah, we agree there is such a thing as society. Democracy is good.
Hmm.
Public welfare is a good thing.
Right.
Like, if you can agree with those, that's kind of the public, and the rest of the world, you can see it in the rest of the civilized world. That's the political middle,
Right.
right? That's not
Yeah.
that's not an extreme position.
Yeah.
Only here will they say, like, if you say, oh well, yeah, I believe in democracy and I believe in, healthcare as a human right, oh, you're far left. What?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. That's even
That, that,
biblical. Like,
right. That's crazy to me. I've argued where in the Constitution, when it talks about the welfare or whatever, to me, healthcare falls under that. And right. They didn't have
general
the
welfare.
right. They didn't talk about, they didn't have that concept of national health care or whatever back then. But, to me, that's what that means. And that's
Yeah.
what I take from that.
If
But
they,
yeah,
so I mean, it's funny because if you look at the philosophical ideas that they based what they did at the time off of, right? Like you said, the belief that all men are created equal. I mean, now granted, they were hindered by the society in which they were doing this, and
mhm,
the technology levels and everything. So, and the power structure in which they were trying to do all of this, right? So, they trying to rebel against the largest monarchy in the world, and they were trying to make a compromise between 13 states who were very different.
mhm,
And in order to do that, they did things that weren't, like, all men are created equal, yes, but some of these people we need on our side were slaveholders. And
right,
so that was the reality of the situation. There were compromises. But I think personally, if you look at if the founding fathers, with the ideals and philosophy they had at the time, had
mhm,
access to the technology and
mhm,
societal norms of today, they would
mhm,
absolutely be, because they wanted the government, they wanted the whole purpose of the government that they formed was laid out in the founding documents. Like you mentioned, it was to promote the general welfare was one of them. They believed that one of government's roles was to promote the general welfare of the people. So if they knew about hospitals and medical
right,
things, maybe, heck
right.
yeah, universal health care like the rest of the world does. It is only, in my opinion, an extremist American. It's weird because living here in America, and having traveled, it feels like I'm living in a crazy place, right? Like, because you
What do you
realize
mean
the
it
rest of the
feels
world.
like?
Yeah, well,
You are
you're right.
living
I
in a
am
crazy
living, and
place.
you realize the reality is I am living in a crazy place, because it is that so many Americans, this idea of American
Yeah.
exceptionalism bleeds into so much of, like, what's going on right now with the
Well,
craziness in masks. People think that they're so entitled. They didn't think they needed a union, but now they're mad because they feel
but,
entitled to the
but,
protections of a union.
so let me throw this out there. So one of the railings I've heard, especially under President Trump, was the silent majority, or those individuals who felt that their voices hadn't been heard.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
so and correct me if I'm wrong. So we had the second Bush in office, then we had President Obama, then we had Trump. So three presidents, one of them was Democrat. So you telling me that your voice wasn't heard in what 12 years of Republican, run, executive and legislature. I can't remember how long the Democrats were in power. It was 2 years under Obama. I
Right.
don't know about President Bush, but I don't think they were
They
in
only
power back then.
No,
So
they only got power at the end of Bush's term, really.
right, so and that's like I don't want to hear that. It goes in cycles. One party is in power, then the other comes in power. The problem is that neither one wants to hear what the other side has to say. There's
Oh
no
no,
compromise.
America, the American citizenry is stuck in the middle of a game of good cop, bad cop between these two parties, right? They both play good cop, bad cop against the other one, claim they're the good guy, the other guy's evil, the other guy's a bad guy. And meanwhile, there nothing changes, and they don't neither one of them represents the actual will or needs of the people.
Right.
You know, there's
Because,
been studies done. There was I believe it was Oxford or Harvard. I have to look it up, but there was a study done that actually showed that technically America is an oligarchy. We're not a constitutional republic or any of that
right.
stuff because they don't represent the will of the people. A republic
Exactly.
actually has representatives, and we don't have that.
Well,
They only represent the 1%, the money.
the problem that I have with it is that no one wants to actually lead and run the country. They're more set up as opposition parties,
right?
As they currently are, and
right.
Right, when the other one is in power, I'm going to do
Yep.
everything I can to hinder you and block you,
yeah,
or whatever. And right,
yeah.
we need people that can come together. Hey, I don't believe in everything that you do, but let's find some accord that we can work together on to do something. And we don't have it.
I loved, I don't know if you've ever seen The West Wing.
I've seen some of it. I haven't seen that
So I remember watching The West Wing with my mom when I was younger. And even back then, I remember thinking to myself, like, these were the protagonists of the show, right? They were supposed to be the good guys. But
right.
I realized, like, so many people involved at the highest levels of our government, their only real purpose is to spin things, right? And it's so much of what goes on is,
yes,
like you mentioned, is these two parties just in opposition to each other, just acting as opposing forces. And the actual arguments are very often left to the side. And I think obviously that was on purpose. The writer of the show, Aaron, whatever, Sorkin.
Yeah.
Obviously was intentional, but it's gotten so much worse today, where like the teams are like, they've gotten really good, really, really good at running against each other. They've developed these teams of PR and social media and things, media teams. Yeah. So, yeah. The whole thing has been geared towards getting us to fight each other. And then we're backed up with social media that creates self-created bubbles that reinforce these beliefs. Yeah, it really, I mean, at some point people say, like, how do you get out of this? What do you do? Like I mentioned, it feels like we're in a plane going down, and I'm like, oh, there's
no, I'll tell you what it's like, man. It's like the wheel of time.
Oh wow. Oh man, that's a good one. I like that. It's happened before, it's gonna happen again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Still fighting it. We're bound to the wheel.
Yep.
And in a year, people will get that reference. Look at us, ahead of pop culture.
Yes, sir. Can't wait. Can't wait. Hey, but it's been a good discussion.
Yeah, this has been.
This whole issue with mandated vaccines, I don't know how it's going to play out. I'm sure that there's going to probably be appeals, and it's probably going to take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. But,
well, I mean, honestly, that's the problem with it right now, because there's no unions or anything, no union power. What's going to happen is the employers are going to do whatever the heck they want, because, like you said, these are all at-will employment states. So the employees are going to either get vaccinated or find other work. And they're going to complain all they want about it, and they can sue after the fact, but that's what's going to happen up front. And then there will be all sorts of wrangling and crying after the fact.
Yep.
But yeah,
absolutely.
All right, man.
All right, sir.
Good.
All right.
Intellicide.
Signing off.